Some Little Things by Lynn Brock. Inspector Clutsam of the Yard came into the office of the senior partner of Messrs. Gore and Tolley on the morning of Thursday, June the 27th, looking peeved. He came because Chief Inspector Ruddle of the Yard had called to see Colonel Gore at 3 o'clock on the afternoon of the preceding Monday, and had not been heard of since. "Afternoon, Clutsam," said Gore brightly. "Hot, isn't it? You'd find it cooler without that natty little bowler, wouldn't you?" "Now look here," growled the visitor. "What did Ruddle come to see you about? The Isaacson necklace, wasn't it?" "Yes." "Did he say anything to indicate any line of action he had in view concerning it?" "Not definitely. I gathered that he wanted us to drop the case. He conveyed to me that he had some information which made us quite superfluous. However, as he had by then spent half an hour trying to pump me for information, I concluded that he was talking through his hat." "What time did he leave you?" "A little before 4. "Say where he was going next?" "I gathered somewhere where there was beer. Monday afternoon was also very hot, you remember, and unfortunately I could only offer him whisky. Which reminds me—" Inspector Clutsam undid his face partially, and accepted a cigarette and a whisky without prejudice. "In that case, Colonel," he said, "you're the last person we know of who saw Ruddle alive." "That," replied Gore, "is a very real consolation to me for his loss." "It's nothing to be funny about," snapped Clutsam. "In life," murmured Gore agreeably, "Chief Inspector Ruddle was not an amusing person. In death, I admit, he will be a very serious proposition for any sort of hereafter to tackle. You think he is, deceased?" "Think? Ruddle's been put away. I know it. There are plenty who do the job and glad of it. He's been bumped off. I tell you, I know it. He was due back at the Yard on Tuesday morning for a conference with the Commissioner. He didn't stay away from that just to be funny, and we haven't been able to find him for 2 days. Someone's got him." "As we are on the 4th floor," said Gore reassuringly, "we have no cellar. But you are at liberty to inspect our strong room." "Why did you ask him to come here if you had nothing to tell him?" "We didn't." "Well, he told the clerk you did. That you rang him up at 2 o'clock on Monday and told him you had something special for him about the Isaacson necklace." Gore considered his cigarette thoughtfully. "Now, there's an instance of the importance of little things, Clutsam. If Ruddle had mentioned to me that he had got that message, I rather think both you and he would have been saved some trouble. But he didn't. He just blew in as if he owned my office, talked eyewash for half an hour, lost his temper, and made an unsuccessful attempt to bluff us off the case. Pity. But, as it happens, it makes things more interesting." "What things?" snarled Clutsam. "Oh, stolen necklaces and things. As a rule, they bore us horribly. Necklaces do. As a matter of fact, in strictest confidence, we decided just 25 minutes ago to leave Lady Isaacson to you gentlemen of the Yard. I'm wondering now if we shall." "Stop wondering," growled the visitor. "You take it from me, Colonel. This Isaacson woman is a—" "Now that's just what Ruddle said about her," smiled Gore winningly. "Have another little drink, and tell me why you people dislike this poor little lady so much. By the way, I hope you haven't been very unkind to her about that smash-up on the Portsmouth Road last month, have you?" Lady Isaacson was the wife of a millionaire, and a very showily handsome young woman. She had been comparatively unknown to fame, until, some 6 weeks previously, she had made a determined attempt to kill one of His Majesty's ministers. Returning in the small hours of the morning from London to her Surrey residence near Farnham, she had crashed into a car going Londonwards, near Guildford. The important personage had escaped without injury, though his car had been badly damaged. But the incident had been given elaborate publicity by a certain section of the press, owing to the fact that the lady had been driving well over on the wrong side of the road at a furious pace, and, it was alleged, in a condition of intoxication. She had refused to disclose the name of a gentleman, not her husband, who had been her passenger at the time of the accident, and on whose lap, according to the important person's chauffeur, she had been sitting. A detail which had added additional piquancy to the fact that she had been returning from a very notorious nightclub. The loss, a few weeks later, of an immensely valuable diamond necklace, which had been stolen from her town residence in Grosvenor Square, had revived the interest of the British public in this sprightly young person. The necklace had been insured for £120,000, but Lady Isaacson had issued a statement to the press disclaiming all intention to hold the insurance company concerned to its liability. She desired, she said, to discover if the police, who spent so much time in attending to other people's business, could attend to their own with any satisfaction to the public. Inspector Clutsam had shut up his face again. It was quite clear that he did not intend to answer the last question. Upon consideration of the face, Gore picked up an unsigned letter from a little heap upon his desk, tore it across, and dropped it into the waste paper basket. "These little things," he said. "Now, you know, you and Ruddle have been bullying Lady Isaacson to get out of her the name of the man who was with her." Clutsam made a noise of contempt as he rose. "Why did you decide to take Ruddle's advice?" he demanded. "We didn't." "Then why did you decide to drop the necklace affair?" Gore reached for the Morning Post, which lay on the top of his desk, and indicated a small paragraph tucked away at the foot of an unimportant page. "Another little thing, Inspector. Let's see what you make of it." "A curious occurrence," Clutsam read, "is reported from Bath. William Blandy, an elderly tramp, was admitted to the infirmary on Tuesday, suffering from injuries to his head and eye. According to his statement, he was struck by a heavy object while asleep during the previous night on his way from Salisbury to Westbury, and rendered unconscious. On awakening in the morning, he found close to him a wash-leather bag containing a necklace of what he supposed to be diamonds, fastened by a gold clasp set with 3 emeralds. Upon examination, however, by a Bath firm of jewellers, the supposed precious stones proved imitations. No explanation is forthcoming of the circumstances which occurred shortly after midnight in a remote spot at a considerable distance from any road or habitation. It is feared that the unfortunate man will lose the sight of the injured eye." "Curious little story, isn't it?" Gore commented. "You remember that Lady Isaacson's necklace had a clasp with 3 emeralds. Not that I suggest for a moment that hers is a fake, but that's why we thought of dropping the case." "Seems a damn silly reason to me," blew Clutsam. He dropped the newspaper disdainfully. "Hell, I'm fed up. I've heard enough fairy tales in the last 25 years. I'll tell you what it is, Colonel, I'm sick of this job. Here I am running round like a potty rabbit for the last 48 hours without a square meal or half an hour's sleep, with everyone yelling at me, 'Have you got Ruddle? Why the what's it, haven't you? You get him or you get out. There's a man waiting for your job.' Are these beggars in the papers blackguarding you? People looking at you as if you were a mad dog? Hell, I'm tired of it. Here, can I use your phone for a moment? My kid's bad. Diphtheria. I haven't been able to get home since Monday morning." The burly, dogged figure bent over the instrument and rang up a Balham number. "That's you, Alice. How's the boy?" "Worse." "Yeah, get another doctor at once." No, I can't go. I can't, old thing. Sorry, girlie." "Get the second opinion at once. The best man. I'll ring up this evening. Stick it, kid." Clutsam straightened himself. "The kid's got to go, the missus says," he said simply. "Bit of good news for a chap, isn't it? Well, good morning, Colonel." A little thing, but it moved Gore. On the whole, his relations with the police, professionally, were rather trying. But no one knew better than he how hard was the task to which Clutsam and his colleagues, in uniform and out of it, were bound day and night. The ceaseless vigilance that alone made life for the citizen even tolerably secure. At the moment, the man in the street and the man on the bench had their knives into the police. No doubt in private life, Clutsam and his Alice had to suffer the averted eyes and sotto voces of their neighbours. Experience had taught Gore, too, what sort of a job it was to look for a lost man in London. Long days, perhaps long weeks of false scents and monotonous failure. The search for a needle in a haystack of stupidity, falsehood, and hostility. Also, he was interested by William Blandy's misadventure. He took Clutsam by the shoulders and pushed him down into a chair. "Don't be in a hurry," he said. "That telephone message we didn't send has given me an idea. The cigarettes are there. It's only an idea, but there is the fact that the lift was not working on Monday afternoon, and that Ruddle went down by the stairs. Sit tight for a bit, will you?" The bit lengthened to nearly half an hour before he returned. But he returned with news which brought the impatient Clutsam to his feet in a hurry. "I think I've found where Ruddle went when he left here," he said. "Care to see?" The building in Norfolk Street, which housed Messrs. Gore and Tolley on its fourth floor, contained the offices of some score of assorted businesses. On the third floor, by the staircase down which Gore led Clutsam, were, at one end of a long corridor, the office of a literary agent, at the other end those of a turf accountant named Welder, and facing them those of the Victory Aeroplane Company. In the doorway of Mr. Welder's office, the caretaker of the building awaited them, jangling his bunch of keys. They went in and surveyed the three meagerly furnished rooms. Gore pointed to a window which he had opened. "I rather think they got him in here somehow, and I rather think they got him out of here by that window, when they were ready, probably at night, when it was quiet." He leaned out to point down into a narrow yard below. "Some of the tenants here park their cars down there. There's a gate into the street. It would be quite simple to cart him away." Clutsam stared about him incredulously. "Bunkum!" he snapped. "There isn't a chair out of place. Ruddle would have wrecked this place before 6 men got him. There isn't anything to show—" Gore pointed to a cigarette, which lay under the table of the inner office. "Just one little thing, Clutsam. Look at it. Been in trouble, hasn't it?" Clutsam stooped and picked up the cigarette, which was badly bent and burst at its middle. But he derived no other information from it. "You smoked one of that brand just now, Clutsam," Gore smiled. "If you'll forgive swank, it's rather an expensive brand. Also, you notice that it has barely been smoked. Now, I gave Ruddle a cigarette just as he was leaving me on Monday afternoon. Of course, they tidied up, but they left this little thing. Careless of them. Why wasn't the lift working on Monday afternoon, Parker?" The caretaker could not say. The lift had jammed at a little before 3, but had been got right shortly after 4. He had never seen Mr. Welder, never known anyone to use these offices, since they'd been taken by Mr. Welder a couple of weeks before. From the agents who had let the offices, the telephone elicited no information, except that Mr. Welder had paid 6 months' rent in advance. They had never seen him. "Let's see," suggested Gore, "if the people over the way can tell us anything about him." But the clerk in charge of the Victory Company's office, apparently the staff consisted of a clerk and the manager, Mr. Thornton, who was away, had not seen anyone enter or leave Mr. Welder's office. "Not on last Monday afternoon, about 4? "I wasn't here on Monday, sir. The boss gave me a day off." "Ah, yes," smiled Gore. "That must have been nice. Mr. Thornton himself, I suppose, was here that afternoon?" I believe so, sir. On Tuesday? No, sir. He went down to the works at Bath on Monday night. He's down there now, sir. Ah, yes. Yes, said Gore affably. Many thanks. On the landing, he looked at his watch. 2 more little things, Clutsam. And here's a third. On the occasion of her first visit to us, Lady Isaacson was indiscreet enough to inform me that Mr. Thornton had recommended her to consult us. Care for a run down the Bath Road? I ought to be able to get you back to London by 6. Inspector Clutsam was not a nervous man, but he was, for many reasons, glad when the big Bentley deposited him in Bath 2.5 hours later. They failed to see Mr. Thornton. He was up, it seemed, testing a bus. It was not known when he would come down. But they saw Mr. William Blandy, not at the infirmary, which he had left that morning, but at a police station behind Milsom Street, where the arrival of the celebrated Inspector Clutsam created a feverish stir. Before they saw William Blandy, who had been brought in on a charge of drunkenness, they saw the necklace, a quite first-rate bit of fake. No pains spared, Gore commented. 64 diamonds, 3 emeralds, and 12 small diamonds in a clasp of Egyptian design. Blandy was produced, a haggard, depressed old down-and-out, still stupid with beer, which had made him peevish. The pupil of one bloodshot eye was still distended with atropine. He had torn off the plaster from an ugly cut on his forehead, which was still oozing blood. His story was that on Monday morning he had set out from Salisbury for Westbury and Bath, that he had lost his way, trying to make a short-cut across the plain, and had ultimately lain down to sleep, somewhere or other. He had no clear idea where, save that next day he had walked for 2 hours before reaching Westbury. He had been sound asleep when he had been struck by a mysterious missile which had rendered him unconscious. When daylight had come, he had awakened, still sick and dizzy, and had found the wash-leather bag lying beside him. There had been no road near the spot, no house in view. As he himself expressed it, no blinking nothing. His eye had been very painful, and his forehead had bled a lot, but he had contrived to walk to Bath. He was very indignant over his arrest, which he denounced as part of the plan of the police to deprive him of his reward. Nothing could shake his belief that the necklace was the genuine thing. "Quite sure," Gore asked, that ugly big cut on your forehead was made by this thick, soft, wash-leather bag? "Sure? Course I'm sure." Gore turned to the station sergeant. "Found anything else on him, Sergeant?" In deference to Inspector Clutsam, the sergeant apologized profusely. The man had only been brought in an hour before. He fell upon the unfortunate Blandy at once, and to his considerable surprise, extracted from various parts of his dingy person the sum of £9 odd in notes and silver, together with an expensive fountain pen. Blandy refused to say how he had come by this wealth. "That's a very smart boot you've got on your right foot, my man," said Gore. "Let's have a look at it. Don't be coy." The prisoner's footwear made certainly the oddest of pairs. His left boot was a shapeless, split, down-at-heel old ruin, and presented the appearance of having been dipped in whitewash the day before. The right boot was a dapper, sharp-toed, even foppish affair of excellent quality, still presenting beneath its dust evidences of recent polishing. "Now, it's a curious thing, Clutsam," mused Gore, "but I recall distinctly that Ruddle was wearing an extremely doggy pair of boots on Monday afternoon. I wonder if by any chance—" Clutsam had the boot off and examined it with bristling ruff. Then he fell upon the luckless Blandy with a ferocity which suddenly sobered that unlucky finder of windfalls. He admitted that he had found the boot, close to where he had found the bag, about 100 yards away. He had also found the £9 odd and the fountain pen in a pocket wallet. He had thrown away the wallet and his old right boot. He was placed forthwith in Gore's car, which, followed by another containing a posse of uniformed searchers and 2 plain-clothes men on motorcycles, made a beeline for the high escarpments which rise against the sky to the south of Westbury, climbed them by a vile cart track which ended at the top, and came to a pause, with the vast, flatly heaving expanse of Salisbury Plain stretching away miles and miles to blue, daunting horizons. The task of finding Mr. Blandy's sleeping place appeared, in face of that vast, bare expanse, rising and falling endlessly with the monotony of the sea, almost hopeless. The man had clearly the vaguest recollection of the route by which he had reached that point, the last point of which he was even tolerably certain. The cortege remained motionless, gazing dubiously at the dismaying scenery. But fortunately, another little thing presented itself for Gore's attention. "That left boot of yours has been in wet chalk," he said. "There's been no rain for a fortnight. How did you manage it?" "I got in some water, looking about," Blandy replied surlily. Gore stopped his engine. "He came along this track, he thinks, Clutsam? Well, there's only one kind of water on Salisbury Plain. We've got to find a dew pond, with an old boot and a wallet near it. If you multiply 20 by 25, you'll get the size of Salisbury Plain in square miles. I'm afraid you won't get back to town by 6, Inspector." They placed Blandy upon the track, little more than a sheep track, and urged him forward. For nearly 2 miles he drifted slowly southwards, followed by his escort. But track crossed track. He went down into long, twisting valleys, and toiled up over long, baffling slopes, and became visibly more and more doubtful. At length he halted, completely lost. They left him at that point in charge of a man, and spread out to look for dew ponds. It was just 7 o'clock when an excited motorcyclist rounded up the part with the tidings that Blandy's discarded boot had been found, and, as Gore had predicted, close to a large dew pond, about 4 miles southeast of the point at which they had debouched onto the plain. Hurried concentration produced after some time some further finds. Chief Inspector Ruddle's wallet, a bunch of keys, a small automatic pistol with an empty magazine, one of Messrs. Collins's pocket novels, and a silk handkerchief marked with the initials W.R. At Gore's suggestion, these articles were left where they were found, spaced out at varying intervals over a distance of nearly a mile, and marked by sentinels. Blandy was moved up to point out the exact spot where he had slept, and indicated the gorse bush in which the automatic had been found. He admitted then that he had found it, but had been afraid to take it. He agreed that possibly it might have been the automatic which had struck him. Gore looked along the line of sentinels. "Anything occur to you, Clutsam? I mean, from the fact that these things are all along one dead straight line, from this dew pond to where that farthest man is. Let's just see where Bath lies from here." One of the motorcyclists produced a map. Gore himself produced a pocket compass. A very brief inspection revealed the fact that the line of sentinels ran dead for the point where, invisible and 30 miles away to the northwest, Bath lay among its hills. "By jing!" muttered Clutsam. Gore turned about to face southeast again. "Well now," he smiled, "all we have to do is to go along our line until we come to Ruddle." The vast emptiness of the landscape chilled Clutsam's hope. "Hell," he murmured. "Well," demanded Gore, "if you can find me in England a likelier place for a stunt of this sort, we'll go there. Of course, Ruddle's your bird, my dear fellow." Well, we'll go on for a bit," agreed Clutsam at last. The party spread out and advanced in parallel, with occasional halts to verify the line of march. The sun went down in a final crash of gold and scarlet. The landscape greyed. A chill little wind whispered of the coming night. The men began to mutter. Were they going to walk to Salisbury? As the miles crept up, even Gore himself began to think of a dinner that wouldn't happen. But the end of the quest came with startling suddenness. Abruptly, from behind one of those rings of beeches that studded the desolation blackly, an aeroplane shot up, wheeled, and came rushing towards them. Twice it circled above their heads, then fled away to northwest, along the line by which they had come. "Well, we shan't find Mr. Thornton," commented Gore. "Perhaps not Ruddle. All the same, I should like to see if there's anything in that clump of beeches." They pushed on for a last mile and passed into the gloomy shadow of the trees. In there was an abandoned farm, silent and desolate. But in its living room they found the remains of a recent picnic meant for 4 people, and in a padlocked cellar of extremely disagreeable dampness and darkness they found Chief Inspector Ruddle, handcuffed and flat on his back on the slimy floor, to which he was securely pinned down. Above his head, a water butt stood on trestles, and from its spigot, at intervals of 30 seconds or so, a drop fell upon his forehead. For the greater part of 3 days and 2 nights, that drop had fallen in precisely the same spot, between the victim's eyes. Ruddle was a man of iron nerve, but he was rambling a bit already. Day was breaking when Gore deposited Inspector Clutsam outside his house at Balham. He waited until the big, burly man came hastening down the narrow little strip of garden again. "Good news, Colonel," he said. "The kid's got through the night. They say he'll pull through now. I won't forget this. It'll be a big thing for me." "Good," smiled Gore. "But don't forget the little things. You never know." Whatever it proved for Inspector Clutsam, the Yard maintained a modest silence concerning the affair. But Lady Isaacson was quite frank about it, in a little chat which she had with Gore next day. In their anxiety to identify her male companion in the night of the smash, they suspected that he had been the driver of the car. Ruddle and Clutsam had undoubtedly overdone their repeated examinations of the lady, who had determined to get some of her own back. Thornton, a well-known flying man, and as Gore suspected, the hero of the smash-up, arranged the plan and enlisted the necessary aids, 3 reckless airmen. An imitation necklace was procured, and a vacant office, opposite Thornton's, taken. A bogus robbery of the real necklace was actually carried out, leaving careful clues as bait for the police. The next step was to enlist Messrs. Gore and Tolley as stool pigeons, and get Ruddle to their offices at a known hour. At 3 o'clock on the Monday afternoon, the lift had been put out of action. Ruddle was in Gore's office, and everything was ready. As he went down the stairs, Ruddle had been met on the 3rd floor by a young man, who, under the pretence of having some information to give him, had persuaded him to enter Welder's offices. There, in an inner room, the fake necklace had been produced, and had completely deceived the Chief Inspector. While he was examining it, Thornton and his fellow conspirators had entered the outer room. As Ruddle came out, they caught him neatly with a noosed rope, gagged him, and handcuffed him, not without a severe struggle, despite the odds, and when the building was quiet, had lowered him in a sack to the Yard, and quite simply carted him off to Bath. There he had been transferred to a big passenger plane, and carried off a little before midnight to the lonely old farm on Salisbury Plain, which had been rented for the stunt. The mysterious windfalls were simply accounted for. Above the plane, Thornton had had the pleasant idea of slinging the unfortunate Chief Inspector over the side of the plane by his waist and legs. In due course, Ruddle's pockets had emptied themselves of their heavier contents, while the rope holding one leg had slipped and had pulled off one of his boots. It had not been intended to carry the torture of the dripping drop to any serious point. The prisoner had been visited twice a day, and was to have been released on the Friday. Lady Isaacson, who had made a personal inspection of her victim, was quite satisfied that she had got more than her own back in return for her ruffled self-respect. "I'll say this for the brute," she laughed. "He never squealed from start to finish. Look here, what put you on to us?" Gore rose, smiling, to finish the interview. "Oh, one or two little things," he said. Lynn Brock. Lynn Brock was one of several pseudonyms used by the Irish writer Alistair McAllister, 1877 to 1943. Born in Dublin, McAllister was educated at Clongowes College, a Jesuit school in County Kildare, once attended by James Joyce. After school, he gained a scholarship to the Catholic University of Ireland in Dublin, and on graduating in 1899 with a first in ancient classics, he set about becoming a playwright while working as a clerk at his alma mater. Although McAllister had some success with short stories, his first 3 play scripts were rejected, one by W.B. Yeats. But perseverance paid off, and his first play was presented, as by Henry Alexander, on the 12th of May 1905 by Edward Compton's Comedy Company. A one-act comedy, The Desperate Lover, is set in a bookshop in the 18th century, and its original cast included Compton's son, Montague, later to become rather better known as the novelist Compton Mackenzie. McAllister was nothing if not bold. After seeing the actor-manager Lena Ashwell perform in London, he sent her The Desperate Lover, suggesting she might like to present it. Ashwell was impressed and commissioned a second play from him. The result, a 3-act melodrama called Irene Wycherley, opened in 1907 at the Kingsway Theatre in London, with Ashwell in the title role. The horribly grim but splendidly acted play, credited to Anthony P. Wharton, was a huge success, even more so when it toured the following year with the celebrated actress Mrs. Patrick Campbell in the lead, and the Irish Independent hailed Wharton as a brilliant fellow, a person of intellect, a writer of promise. McAllister's next play was A Nocturne, staged in 1908 as one of a quartet of one-act plays, and it was followed in 1912 by a most delightful comedy, At the Barn, starring the celebrated singer Marie Tempest. At the Barn was also a success, and in 1921 a cinema adaptation appeared under the title 2 Weeks. However, his next play, Sylvia Greer, was a flop, which McAllister appears to have anticipated because he did not allow his name to appear in any advertisements, or even outside the theatre. In 1913, there was a brief run of a one-act thriller, 13 Simon Street, and in 1915, A Guardian Angel and Benvenuto Cellini. By this time, McAllister was serving in France with the motor machine gun service of the British Army. He was wounded twice, and in 1916, while he was lying in a Dublin hospital, his next play, inspired by the Maybrick case, was staged. The script of The Riddle was co-credited to another writer, Morley Roberts, although he had done little more than edit McAllister's original script. The production had a strong cast, including the playwright Dion Boucicault as a Machiavellian barrister, and, as a woman once accused of murder, the great Irene Vanbrugh. The notices were good, but McAllister was unhappy with Roberts' changes, and around a year later the play was restaged in Dublin in its original form, this time credited solely to Anthony P. Wharton, and with the original title, The Ledbetter Case. McAllister must have been very disappointed that this, the original version of his play, was less well received than The Riddle. Although Irene Wycherley and other plays continued to be staged, McAllister's reputation as a playwright was beginning to fade. He therefore began writing fiction again, with short stories appearing in Pearson's magazine and the Empire Review. His first novel, Joan of Overbarrow, 1921, was a comedic romance. "If I had to choose between marrying you and dying in a pigsty, I should prefer to die in a pigsty." Later books were more serious. The Man on the Hill, 1923, anticipates the general strike of 1926, while Be Good, Sweet Maid, 1924, is a viciously misogynistic study of a woman novelist. In a lighter vein, Evil Communications, 1926, is a series of sketches providing a rollicking study of village life. And The Two of Diamonds, 1926, is a historical romance set in Second Empire France. In the 1920s, crime fiction was very much considered a lesser branch of literature, and for his first mystery, McAllister, then working as a publican in Surrey, adopted a new pseudonym, Lynn Brock. His first Brock novel, The Deductions of Colonel Gore, 1924, introduced Wickham Gore, a retired soldier turned explorer who returns from Africa to discover blackmail and murder among his friends. In an overcrowded market, Colonel Gore was an immediate success. His first case was followed up by a golfing mystery, Colonel Gore's Second Case, 1925, and the extraordinary Colonel Gore's third case, The Kink, 1925. Over the next 20 years, McAllister produced 4 more Colonel Gore books, including The Mendip Mystery, 1929, its sequel, QED, 1930, and the multiple murder mystery The Stoat, 1940. The Lynn Brock name also appeared on some standalone novels, perhaps the best known being the revenge thriller Nightmare, 1932. At heart, McAllister was always a playwright, and he wrote 2 final plays, presented as by Lynn Brock. In 1929, a farce called Needles and Pins, which received poor reviews, and in 1931, an adaptation of The Mendip Mystery. One of only 2 uncollected short stories to feature Colonel Gore, Some Little Things, was first published in the Radio Times on the 21st of December, 1928. I am grateful to the bookseller and archivist Jamie Sturgeon for drawing it to my attention. Hot Steel by Anthony Barclay. "Hitler wouldn't half give something for a sight of what you're looking at now," bawled the little foreman. Amid the deafening din of a huge munition works, Roger Sheringham could hardly hear the words. He grinned amiably and nodded, saving his larynx. "Come and see what this lot's doing," invited the foreman. Roger looked round for his host, saw that he had not reappeared, and followed his deputy towards a little group of half-naked men who were wiping the sweat off their foreheads with the air of something accomplished. Some kind of a lull in the general din made conversation possible, and Roger learned that they'd been forging the barrel of a 6-inch gun. He said the appropriate things. "And I expect Hitler would give something for the sight of that, too," he added with a smile. The burly man nearest to him wiped his forehead again. "Well, sir, even Hitler must know we're making guns in England by this time." To Roger this seemed a very reasonable remark, but the little foreman appeared to find it highly humorous. "Ah, it ain't the barrels," he shouted. "It's what's in 'em." "Shells, you mean?" hazarded Roger, relieved to find that the burly workman appeared just as bewildered as himself before the foreman's wit. "Shells?" replied that humorist. "Ah, what I mean, it all depends if you know what you're looking at." "He's looking at a gun forging, same as you are," rejoined the burly workman, with an air of finality. "Come on, mates." Roger was not sorry to be rescued at that moment by his host. Arthur Luscombe at school had been a large, heavy boy, with a passion for imparting unwanted information in a ponderous manner. Now, as the managing director and virtual owner of Luscombe and Sons, he seemed to Roger to have altered very little. Leading his guest with measured footsteps towards his private office, he appeared determined on sacrificing his valuable time to pouring into Roger's reluctant ears just about everything anyone could want to know about steel, and a good deal more than most did. Austenite alloy steels, low elasticity, manganese steels, toughness, resistance to abrasions, high tensile alloy steels, gun tubes, resistance to shock, nickel, chromium, molybdenum. You're not listening, Sheringham. I am, Roger protested, as they turned into the managing director's office. You were talking about steel. I mean, he added hastily, after a glance at the other's face, you were saying that some alloys were harder than others, and some not so hard. I mean, greater elasticity. Yes, and I say, though, wouldn't Hitler give something to see what I've just seen? The managing director's response to this artless query surprised its maker. It was with a positive start and a look of something remarkably like suspicion that he snapped, "What exactly do you mean by that?" Well, nothing, Roger returned, lamely. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even original. Your foreman said it, so I thought. Johnson had no right to say anything of the sort. But it doesn't matter, does it? Roger asked, still more surprised. I mean, munition works and so on. Well, naturally, Hitler. Yes, of course. Naturally. Still, Johnson. However, it's of no importance. Now, I can just spare another 10 minutes, Sheringham. Would you care to see our sidings? I have to go there myself, in any case. Oh, I should like to, above all things, Roger said agreeably. 5 minutes later, he was trying to look intelligently at long lines of railway trucks, but over which Mr. Luscombe threw the complacent eye of proprietorship. Most interesting, Roger said, doing his stuff. And I suppose this is the, raw steel, or whatever you call it. Where does that come from? Sorry, I can't answer that sort of question, Sheringham, his host retorted, with, Roger thought, insufferable complacency. Official secrets, you know. Yes, O'Connor, what is it? Seeing his employer's attention distracted, the sidings foreman grinned sympathetically at Roger. Not that there's much official secret about it, sir, he said behind his hand. Anyone's only got to look at the labels on the trucks. Roger looked. More exactly. In fact, you get the stuff from Henbridge, wherever that may be. Looks like a government works. Well, no, as a matter of fact, we don't. We're getting our steel now from Allen and Backhouse of Wolverhampton, this other label. That one's cancelled. Some consignment from Henbridge to Allen and Backhouse. Nothing to do with us. The foreman saw Mr. Luscombe returning, and hastily stepped back with an air of childlike innocence. The rest of Roger's visit to the premises of Luscombe and Sons was uneventful. Indeed, it might very easily have passed out of his mind altogether. It is true that on getting home he had the curiosity to look up Henbridge in the Gazetteer, and learned that it was a small village in the more inaccessible part of Cumberland, remarkable only as the site of the only cocodium deposits in England. Whereupon he looked up cocodium in the encyclopedia and gathered that it was a rare metal, resembling vanadium, but possessing certain unique properties, found only at Henbridge, in Cumberland. It was just one of those coincidences, which so often do happen, which brought the name of Henbridge up in a conversation a few days later at Roger's club. It appeared that the man to whom he was talking lived there. Roger asked him about it. Used to be a grand little place, if you like 'em remote, replied the other, pitched up among the Cumberland fells and nearly a dozen miles from the nearest railway station. But it's all spoilt now. They've put up a huge great factory or something just outside, and the fells are covered with wooden huts. Just breaks my heart. Seems queer, Roger suggested. To choose a site a dozen miles from the nearest railway for a factory? The man snorted. But isn't it typical? Besides, that wouldn't worry 'em. They've brought the railway to Hedenbridge. It certainly seems off, Roger said mildly, and went away to look up trains. And you were as bad as any of them, Roger was saying severely to a stricken Mr. Luscombe a few hours later. Your works foreman was like a child playing with fire. Couldn't help trying to be clever and drop hints that the stupid visitor wouldn't understand. He showed me there was some kind of secret going on. A simple remark of an irritated workman showed that the hands weren't in the secret, so it obviously wasn't a new hush-hush weapon. And then you gave me the biggest clue yourself. I only told you the few elementary facts that you could have got out of any textbook, protested the deflated remains of the managing director. It was the way you marshalled them. I know nothing of steel, but even I gathered that the hardest steels won't stand up so well to shock, and the ones that stand up best to shock have other drawbacks. You showed me that this fact, above all others concerned with steel, was most important to you. Naturally enough, perhaps, as one occupied in making gun tubes. But there it was. The ideal steel alloy for a gun tube had yet to be found. All the known ones lacked full efficiency, one way or the other. Then your sidings foreman gave away that your suppliers have recently been changed, and I learnt that these suppliers are receiving consignments of what can only be cacodium. The inference is obvious. Experiments using an alloy with cacodium to combine high resistance to both shock and friction have been successful. Consignments of this cacodium steel are now reaching you and are being tried out for 6-inch naval guns. If Hitler had any idea of it, the works would be blown sky high within 24 hours. So what? And after all, why talk at all? Look here, Sheringham, pleaded the unfortunate man. In the end, Roger magnanimously promised to carry the matter no further. He decided that the managing director had learned his lesson, and it was quite certain that he would teach the others theirs. Anthony Berkeley. Anthony Berkeley Cox, 1893 to 1971, is one of the most important writers of the Golden Age. Cox had a playful approach to the business of writing crime and detective fiction. His penchant for twisting tropes and confounding expectations undoubtedly played a major role in the genre's development, away from a simple linear narrative, in which characters are introduced, a crime is committed, clues are solved, and the criminal is detected, into a more complex form, in which almost anything can happen. Cox's great detective, Roger Sheringham, is virtually the antithesis of Sherlock Holmes, arrogant rather than showily omniscient, and unlikable rather than unclubbable. Nonetheless, with only a few lapses from greatness, the detective stories that Cox wrote as Anthony Berkeley, as well as the smaller number of psychological thrillers published as by Francis Iles, should be on the bookshelf of anyone who professes to love crime fiction. Cox was born in Watford, north of London, and educated at Sherborne, a boarding school in Dorset. After school he went to Oxford, and after coming down in 1916 with a Bachelor of Arts degree from University College, Oxford, he enlisted in the British Army, serving in France. After being demobbed, Cox embarked on a career as a humorist, producing countless short stories and comic sketches for a huge range of magazines, while, working with J.J. Sterling Hill, he expanded a 20-minute vignette into a futuristic opera, The Merchant Prince. He also started to write crime fiction, exclusively so, once he found it paid better than other genres. His earliest novels were published anonymously, and Cox's career took off with the publication as Anthony Berkeley of Roger Sheringham and the Vane Mystery, 1927, and as A.B. Cox, Mr. Priestley's Problem, 1927, which he went on to adapt for the stage the following year as Mr. Priestley's Night Out. Cox was never without a sense of humour, and in all of his Anthony Berkeley novels, his tongue is firmly in his cheek, a tendency deplored by some contemporary reviewers. As well as incorporating humour and taking an iconoclastic approach to the genre's rules, Cox found the history of crime a ready source of inspiration, using several infamous crimes as the starting point for a detective story. He also broadcast on the BBC and its predecessor, 2LO. Finally, as the self-styled first freeman of the Detection Club, the dining society for crime writers that he and others had created in 1929, Cox played a key role in developing ideas to raise funds, including an anthology of crime writing, as well as the club's novel, The Floating Admiral, 1931, and other multi-authored stories. Cox never made any secret of the fact that his motivation was money, and at the end of the 1930s he stopped writing crime fiction when he found that he could be paid well for simply reviewing it, which he did up until shortly before his death in 1971. Since Cox's death, his books have drifted in and out of print, but many will be familiar with his Francis Isles book, Before the Fact, 1932, in the form of one of Hitchcock's most successful films, Suspicion, 1941, with Cary Grant and Joan Fontaine, as well as the late Philip Mackey's superb 1979 serial for the BBC of Malice Aforethought, 1931, starring Hugh Bennett. Hot Steel was one of 2 syndicated stories written specially to raise awareness of the dangers of loose chatter during the Second World War. The story was published in the Gloucester Citizen on the 27th of April 1943, with the postscript: "Do you work in a munitions factory? If so, do you ever drop hints about the work you are doing? Don't. What may seem only a hint to you may be a whole explanation to someone else. And there are dangerous people about, you know." The House of the Poplars by Dorothy L. Sayers. Adrian Belford, emerging from the office of Messrs. Golding and Moss, financiers, hesitated uncertainly at the corner of Conduit Street and Bond Street. There was a heavy coldness at the pit of his stomach, and his tongue felt dry. He had, indeed, succeeded in getting the loan renewed, but for 1 month only, and at what a cost! He could see now Mr. Golding's deprecatory smile, the spreading of his plump fingers with their heavy rings that winked in the lamplight. He heard himself saying with an effort at easy bravado, "It is good security, Mr. Golding." Heard the smooth, thick sibilance of Mr. Golding's reply. "No security is absolutely sound, Mr. Belford. That depends upon a lady's caprice, eh?" The swine! If ever a fool, thought Mr. Belford, had been called upon to pay heavily for his follies, he was that fool. There was his marriage to a plain and peevish invalid, far older than himself, only to find that the narrow hands whose clammy limpness had always displeased him could cling like limpets where money was concerned. Then there was that first unfortunate speculation in Megatherium stock. Then the long series of disasters attending his desperate efforts to recoup his losses. Finally, the incredible suicide of mad Lord Ingleborough, whom everybody had expected to go lingering on forever in his luxurious asylum. In 2 months' time, the new Lord Ingleborough would be of age, and would demand an account of the trust funds. In 2 months! His limbs felt leaden, like those of a swimmer climbing out of deep water. Bond Street, with its close ranks of packed and palpitating traffic, roared in his ears, beat in his face, buffeted him. Men and women jostled upon the pavement, hurrying past him, pressing upon him. The glare of shop windows, a little diffused by the light October mist, was a cruelty to his eyeballs. Nothing was real. He, with his sick apprehensions, was the only living and suffering thing in a puppet show of painted masks and jerking movements and noise. He shrank back and shot his hunted glance to left and right of him. It was then that he noticed the restaurant. It stood on the opposite side of Conduit Street, almost directly opposite the moneylender's premises. It was small and unpretentious, the lower half of its window discreetly veiled by a lace curtain, against which hung a framed menu. The upper half bore the legends Sandwich Bar, Cocktail Bar, silhouetted against the light within. Over the door hung a sign, bearing the single word, Rapallos. He glanced at his watch. It was 6:15. He'd been over an hour screwing concessions out of the moneylender. Like an automaton, he crossed Conduit Street and plunged into the restaurant. The door yielded easily to his touch and fell to behind him with a chuckling click. The place was suffocatingly warm, but it was quiet and almost deserted. A couple, here and there, sat eating American sandwiches at small tables. Occupying nearly half the available floor space was a vast, semicircular bar, gleaming with polished brass and mahogany. Behind it moved two barmen on soundless feet, taking down bottles from the glittering shelves, measuring, pouring, shaking. The lower murmur of conversation from the tables was punctuated by the musical tinkling of ice. Belford marched heavily up to the bar and demanded a large brandy and soda. He drank it down and ordered a second, which he sipped slowly. He was beginning to feel better. The demure atmosphere of the place soothed him. The warmth of the brandy stole into his bones. The door clicked open and shut again with its cosy chuckle. A man joined him at the bar and asked for one of the usual. The barman smiled slyly and secretly at him, as at a well-known patron, and began his dainty manipulations. Like a chemist in his white coat, thought Belford idly. He was reminded of his visit to the chemist that afternoon, and patted his overcoat pocket to assure himself that the little bottle was still there. The other man finished his cocktail and asked for a special variety of hot sandwich. When it came, he turned politely to Belford and requested him to pass the cayenne pepper. "Have you tried one of these?" he added, pointing to his plate. "They are a speciality here." Belford remembered that he had eaten next to nothing at lunch, and suddenly felt that he was hungry. He ordered the sandwich and sat absently playing with his empty glass. Presently he became aware that the stranger was talking. Vague generalities about the political situation and the present state of England. He answered mechanically, trying in a subconscious way to place the other man. He was stout and dark, with a very high and polished skull, beneath which his features, chubby as a child's, seemed dwarfed into insignificance. He was dressed in a dark tweed suit with a stiff wing collar, which pushed the flesh of his chin up into a little pink roll. His hands were soft and white, and moved with delicate precision. On his watch chain he carried a curious emblem or charm, which led Belford to imagine that he might belong to some esoteric order. His hat, which he had taken off and laid on the bar, was a soft black felt, rather wide in the brim, and was the only part of his costume that departed in the least from the conventional. His voice was unusual, very soft and clear, with a kind of fluting sincerity. "And of course, it is not capitalism that is the trouble," he was saying. "One cannot permanently equalize the distribution of wealth. If only those who had the money knew how to spend it. But they don't." Belford agreed. "Rich men are dull dogs, mostly," said the stranger. "They hoard unwisely, and they spend unwisely. The curse of Midas, my dear sir, was lack of imagination. If I were to be given £1,000,000 tomorrow, I should know how to make it yield £1,000,000 worth of enjoyment. And so would you not? If you were given £1,000,000 tomorrow, 100,000, even 50,000. By God, said Belford, I could do with it. His sandwich was brought, and he attacked it savagely. He found it good, curious and unexpected in flavour, but appetizing. The bald-headed man was talking again, but Belford interrupted him. He felt a violent need to unburden himself to somebody. "Look here," he said. "How would you like to be me? I've got to get 20,000 in 2 months' time or blow my brains out. I can't get anything more out of the moneylenders. I'm dipped too far already. And there's 75,000 that belongs to me, that in justice and decency belongs to me. And I can't lay hands on it. What do you think of that?" "That's hard," said the stout man. "My wife's 10 years older than I am. I married her for her money, I admit it, and she knew it. What else would a man have married a plain and sickly middle-aged woman for? Mind you, I did my bit of the bargain. It wasn't my fault if the kid died and my wife turned into a permanent invalid. Why should she grudge me the very smell of her money? Well, the income's all right and helps to keep the place going. But if I even suggest she might lend me a few thousands of the capital, you'd think I was asking for her life." The stout man nodded sympathetically and interjected an order to the barman. "You'd better have one of these, too," he added. "They're another speciality. They're not for the suburban palate, but they cheer up a 5-year-old corpse." Belford said, "All right," and drink was put down before him. He lifted his glass and said, "Here's how." The stuff was queer, certainly, intensely bitter, with fire beneath the bitterness. He was not sure if he liked it. He took it down quickly, like medicine. "She says it will come to me when she dies. But what's the good of that? Creaking doors hang the longest. I've got to have money somehow. I dare say I was an ass to speculate, but it's done now and I can't undo it." He bit savagely at his upper lip. Speculation! If she knew what I needed it for, she'd leave the stuff to a cat's home. She's religious. Religious! Let her husband go to prison rather than— He checked himself. "Mind you, I don't say it's come to that. But what does she want the money for? What good's it to her? Missionary societies and doctors' stuff, that's all she gets out of it. That's a pretty wife for a man, isn't it? What am I to her? A cross between a male nurse and an errand boy, that's all. Forced to kowtow for fear of being cut out of her will. Running about with pills and potions and getting up at night to fill hot water bottles. 500 a year would give her all she wants, and she's worth 75,000. What's the nature of her illness? Damned if I know. Her doctor, Oily Hand I call him, gives a long name to it. Something to do with the kidneys or the spleen or something. And nerves, of course. They all have nerves nowadays. Also insomnia and all the rest of it. One of these damned tablets every blessed night in the year. Not drug-taking, of course. Oh, dear, no. My wife is a religious woman. She wouldn't take drugs. Only a harmless pill to ensure natural sleep. He dragged the little bottle of veronal from his pocket and flung it on the bar counter. His head felt queer, and he was conscious of a curious sensation of interior lightness, as though he were losing touch with realities. He realized dimly that he was talking too much. That odd cocktail must have been pretty potent. The stranger smiled. "Not altogether so harmless," he said. "One might easily take an overdose of that. She probably will one day. They often do, you know." "Think so?" said Belford. "Ah, but she'd go to hell for that, you know. Straight to hell, where their worm dieth not." He laughed. "Worms, eh? That's a nice thing to think about." The stranger leaned towards him. Belford became intensely, seriously aware of his face, with every detail, every line, every tiny pore of the skin marked and individualized, like the pen strokes on a map. It was not a face. It was a continent. It was as wide as Asia, and he was an explorer upon its vast and uninhabited surface. For endless eons he had been marching along its waste expanse, pitted with holes, ribbed with gullies. He stood at the mouth of a dark cavern, filled with trees, smooth and cylindrical, like hairs. He peered into it, as he had peered since the beginning of time, whose huge heartbeats he heard, tick-tock, tick-tock, incredible ages apart. Yet all around him the stealthy life of the restaurant went on. The barman was measuring a rainbow cocktail, pink, green, yellow. Belford suddenly realized the intense, the anxious importance of the comparative weight of liquids. Atoms, molecules, heating upward against the furious downward pressure of gravity. If the pink were to overflow into the green, the universe would be flung into chaos. He saw the bleak immensity of space, peopled with whirling planets over innumerable millions of miles, and all dependent upon that pink and green and yellow pinpoint, the ultimate focus of creation. He laughed. It was funny. It was enough to split your sides that he, and he only, should be in possession of that stupendous secret. 2 months! The stranger's voice floated over the abyss, clear as water. She will take an overdose before the 2 months are up. We can ensure that much for you. You know. The car sped through street after street, where swarms of men and women swam past like sea creatures in a tank. At every bump it rose like a ship, riding huge combers. They were moving fast. They were racing at the speed of light. 186,000 miles a second. He could watch time spinning backwards, like a cinematograph film reeled out the wrong way. Yet nothing was blurred in their headlong flight. Lamppost succeeded lamppost, each one rigid as a soldier on parade, each one with its own mysterious character and importance. His companion was seated beside him, his face averted. He loomed gigantic. His shoulders had the exuberant mass of a sleeping elephant. Belford could hear the billowing outline of his back, like a symphony. It rolled out in striding harmonies. A persistent and bird-like trilling puzzled Belford for a moment, till he traced it to an artificial flower in a silver holder beside him. He felt feverish. "It's rather hot, isn't it?" he said. The stranger put down the window immediately. The air rushing in was cool and invigorating, like river water at dawn. Belford was filled with an utter peace and confidence. He had never before seen the beauty of the world so clearly. The smooth leather of the car's upholstery was a caress to his fingertips. He felt it, slowly, luxuriously. It dipped to a hollow, held down by a round button. The exquisite significance of that button penetrated him with an inward ecstasy. He could feel the sense processes and the thought processes working swiftly and surely within him. The nerves sent up their urgent message, tingling along his arm. He felt the instant flurry of eager interpretation quickening the cells of his brain, threads of grey matter crossing and intercrossing. This was what God felt, this endless awareness, stretching to the outer rim of universal consciousness. If a sparrow fell to the ground, he could feel it. He was sensitive to the movements of a microbe or a star. What absurdity to speak of small or great, as though greatness or smallness had any existence. He knew now that what the saints and sages had said was true, but none of them had ever known it as he knew it. It was funny, it was absurd, millions of men arguing and disputing when he could tell them the whole truth of his own intimate knowledge. But then, everything was funny. Everything had its absurdity, just as it had its beauty and its horror. There were no horrible or beautiful or absurd things. Each one was horrible and beautiful and absurd at once, and quite separately. He must tell people about this. The telephone speaking tube curled over its iron bracket. It was ridiculous. It was the quintessence of absurdity. Gusts of laughter rolled up and suffocated him as he contemplated that preposterous speaking tube. He pointed it out to his companion. Its curve, as it hung there, was a triumph of the incongruous. He shouted and whooped with laughter. One guffaw came breaking over the other like waves on a rocky shore. The laughter of the gods. Stray phrases of Greek, forgotten since his school days, came back to him, shining, clear-cut, and luminous as jewels. Exhausted with his own exuberance, he lay back in his corner. Every time the wheels turned, the cycle of existence turned through 1,000 years. He was God, and he was unutterably lonely. And he was afraid. The stranger had turned and looked at him, and in that look he had seen unspeakable menace. Framed in the dark window of the car, he now saw the river. He saw not merely its surface, streaked with silver and hung over by brooding trees. He saw beneath the water, where the bodies of the dead swam darkly, watched by the flat, round eyes of hungry pike. Small fish, too, devouring one another, struggling for life between the rank stems of the water-weeds, pursuing the dim, unlovely things that grew fat upon contamination and sewage. The moon was coming up, over a long bank of cloud. The cloud was steeped in silver behind, and he saw through and over it, but on the hither side it was black. Terror held him in chains of iron so that he could not cry out. The river had gone, and the moon. The car had stopped. He climbed out of it and stood before a high stone wall, extending right and left, forever. The chauffeur was unlocking the gates. They were enormous. They soared away above his head, so that his neck ached when he tried to see the tops of them. They were green in the headlights. Written across them in bold white letters were the words Smith and Smith, and underneath, in a smaller script, Removals. His companion took him by the arm and led him forward. They moved very slowly. Each step lasted a week and stretched for a mile. On either side of him, tall poplar trees stood in a whispering avenue. How they talked, leaf chattering to leaf in a continual sibilant chorus. The wind shook them, and a leaf fell, slowly, turning and twisting and floating in a dance of inexpressible grace and loveliness. Tears came into his eyes to think that so much wonder could exist. It was heart-rending, and it was beautiful. And all in a moment, he was a small boy, walking with his nurse along the Charwell banks in the grounds of Magdalen College, smelling the sweet, astringent smell of the poplar leaves. The scent rose from the wet earth all about him. His soul ached at it. Then, miles away, glimmering out at the end of the avenue, he saw the House of the Poplars, and knew that he had reached the ultimate significance of all his past and future. Here, since first he stirred in his mother's womb, the house had stood and waited for him. He passed over the threshold. 3 men sat about a table. One of them was tall and thin, with sparse red hair and a straggling, sandy beard. He sniggered when he spoke. "This is Dr. Schmidt," said Belford's companion. "Delighted," said Dr. Schmidt. "It is very good of my friend Mr. Smith to have brought you." He sniggered. "On my right is Mr. Smith. He spells it with a Y." Mr. Smith smiled. He had a narrow, dark face, marked with a long white scar, as though it had been splashed with acid. "It is a pleasure," said he, "to welcome a new client. Mr. Smythe will agree with me, I am sure. He spells his name with a Y and an E." The 4th man grunted. He was square and sallow, and his strong hands had short fingers and hairy knuckles. "Mr. Belford requires a little assistance," said Mr. Smith. "He is troubled with a wife. A wife can be so unnecessary. It is obviously a case for removal." "We undertake removals," said Dr. Schmidt. "They are a speciality of the house," said Mr. Smith. "Perfect discretion, and distance no object," muttered Mr. Smythe. "What are the lady's habits?" inquired Dr. Schmidt. He sniggered again. "How often do I not warn people that it is unwise to contract habits? But they do not listen." "The lady's habits come into your department, I fancy, Doctor," said Mr. Smith. Belford listened as though from a great distance to the details of his own story. The bottle of tablets was in the hands of Mr. Smith. Probably he had kept them ever since Belford had handed them to him that evening, centuries ago, in Rapallo's. But this was a trifle, after all. His attention wandered to the little tune that was being tapped out by the pattern of the tablecloth. It had a note like a xylophone, very bell-like and delicate, and it rippled out a tinny, pastoral melody full of the scent of cowslips and newly budded hawthorn. Dr. Schmidt was speaking. 10 grain doses, 50 tablets and 50 nights, and 2 months to go. That is easy." Mr. Smith turned to Belford. "Listen," he said. "If your wife were to take a fatal overdose within the next 50 days, would it be worth £500 to you?" Extreme clarity of mind came back to Belford in a rush. He spoke precisely, articulating each syllable. It pleased him to feel vowel and consonant marching so orderly from teeth and tongue. "It would be exquisitely worth it," he said. "I stand to receive £75,000 under her will. That would square Ingleborough and put me straight with my debtors. I could easily spare £500. He made a gesture with his hands. £500 in minted gold, running and jingling over the table. Not paper money, but gold. Under his feet he saw deep into the earth, where miners stooped and sweated to drag out the ore for him. Steamers and the noise of the dockyards, leagues of ocean, the work of the world, bringing the wealth of the world to his feet. He saw the pictures best without ever losing sight of the quiet room and the 4 faces clustered beneath that lamplight. Only, on the screen of his imagination, the moving map of the something was mightily unrolled. "Very good," said Mr. Smith. "You have your cheque-book with you? You will write us a cheque for £500, payable, we will allow a margin, 56 days from now. That will bring us to the 17th of December, 8 weeks precisely. The removal, you understand, may take place earlier, but in no case later than 56 days hence, when the cheque will be presented. That is fair, I think. If between now and the day of the removal you should change your mind, you have only to leave word for me at Rapallo. But when once the removal has occurred, it would be unwise to endeavour to stop the cheque. We take our precautions, of course. Have you been abroad lately, by the way?" "I was in Germany last May." Dr. Schmidt sniggered and rose from the table. "You need not hesitate to sign," went on Mr. Smith. "It is our pleasure, as well as our business, to provide these easy little accommodations for our clients. Make it out, please, to Smith and Smith. Thank you. That is admissible. It is remarkable how readily these trifling difficulties can be removed with a stroke of the pen." Belford contemplated his signature. The bold outline of the B pleased him, the swaggering lift and drop of the L and F, and the flourish of the final D. Ludicrous that he should have suffered so long and so acutely, when that powerful pen-shape on a slip of pink paper could set him free. "Anything more?" he asked. "Only your name to the removal order," said Mr. Smith. He sighed again, happily. The paper began, "Order to remove." Then came a blank space, with a dotted line at the bottom, on which his freshly written name stood out blackly. Mr. Smith took the paper from him and filled in, at his dictation, his wife's name and address, and a date, on or before the 17th of December. The laughter that had seized on him before had him in its grip again. He bellowed, clinging to the table for support. "Do you know what time you came home last night, Adrian?" demanded Mrs. Belford peevishly. Without waiting for a reply, she went on. "It was 3:15 in the morning. I will not have these hours kept in my house. There is no godly or respectable occupation that could detain you so long. What can the servants think of you?" Belford smiled. He knew that it had been past 3 o'clock when he returned. The white face of the clock on the landing had struck him as exceptionally ludicrous, with its hands all askew, and its 2 round winder holes goggling at him like reproving eyes. Time had stood still for him during the centuries which it had taken him to climb the interminable staircase. He had slept in the House of the Poplars, and dreamed— what dreams! Even now he chuckled over these fantastic dreams. "It's nothing to laugh at," said Mrs. Belford. "I can only imagine that you were intoxicated. It is most disgusting. Did you even remember to bring home my tablets?" This staggered Belford. Had he done so? Or had he left them in the hands of the sniggering German doctor? He put his hand to his coat pocket, drew out a small package wrapped in white paper and sealed at both ends with sealing wax. He stared at it. He so distinctly remembered having unwrapped it in the restaurant. Mrs. Belford twitched it from him. "At any rate, I'm glad you were not so lost to decency as to leave that behind." She broke the seals and extracted the bottle, setting it upright on the bedside table. "Fortunately, I still had 2 or 3 tablets in the old bottle. Otherwise, I suppose, I might have lain awake in agony all night as far as you were concerned. Why don't you get the stuff from Mullings, instead of depending on me?" enquired Belford impatiently. "I've told you before, I do not care to have my affairs known to the local chemist. Mullings is a perfect centre of gossip. And that is not the point.
Is there any reason why you should object to performing a trifling service for your own wife?"
"None whatever," said Belford cheerfully. He felt curiously well and happy that morning. Whatever it was that he had drunk at Rapallo's, it certainly left no hangover. The only reminder of his curious mental condition the night before was a tendency to see the funny side of everything. It was with difficulty that he checked a guffaw.
"I suppose it is useless to ask you where you were or what you were doing,"
pursued Mrs. Belford. "I met a man and dined with him. We talked business." Belford was amused. He looked down at his wife, and with a recurrence of that extraordinary clarity of vision, his eyes seemed to pierce her sallow skin, and watched the sluggish and diseased blood as it pumped along the arteries, gathering up God knew what poisons by the way.
"See that it doesn't occur again," said Mrs. Belford. "If this kind of thing is going to become habitual, I shall be forced to take steps. My dear father, who amassed his little fortune by hard work and sober living, would turn in his grave to think of its passing into the hands of a drunkard and debauchee."
Belford again controlled his twitching laughter muscles and apologized. The happy hypocrite. What a good phrase that was, and how well it expressed him. He ran down the stairs on escaping from the sick room. Indeed, he seemed to float. His feet scarcely touched the treads. He was so buoyant that he could have skimmed right out of the front door on the wings. His delicious hilarity lasted all day. He astonished his typists and clerks by his pleasant humour. He had only one disagreeable moment, when he took out his private cheque-book to pay a small personal bill. There was a blank counterfoil. He stared at it. Had he really given that cheque for £500 to Smith and Smith? His memory was not at fault. He remembered clearly everything that had happened, up to his falling asleep in the House of the Poplars. He remembered it, but he had not really believed in it. But the cheque was gone. Order to remove, on or before the 17th of December. If you should change your mind, leave a message at Rapallo's. It would be unwise to change your mind after the removal has occurred. A nauseating feeling of horror rose up from some black deep of his subconsciousness. But it passed, and left him laughing at himself. 3 or 4 times during the next 6 weeks, he returned to Conduit Street and walked past Rapallo's. Once he went in and ordered a sandwich and a glass of beer. A different pair of barmen were on duty, and he saw nothing of any Mr. Smith. He came out without leaving any message. If he had had any fixed intention of doing so, the ominous sign of Golding and Moss, financiers, just visible over the lace curtain, would have deterred him. In any case, it was absurd to suppose that Smith and Smith, or Brown, Jones and Robinson, could possibly influence his wife to take an overdose of medicine. As for the cheque, if he had really drawn it, it could make no difference. Bankruptcy and disgrace are bankruptcy and disgrace, and £500, one way or another, was a drop in the bucket. And after all, the weeks went by, and nothing happened. He began to make necessary arrangements. He drew out what remained of his current account, and mentioned to his wife that he had business which called him to Germany. He left on November the 20th. He went to the hotel in Berlin where he had stayed before. One must have an address, if one were not to arouse premature suspicion. Later, if nothing happened at the last moment to render it unnecessary, he could disappear quietly. For he still had dreams. They came to him at night, or walking under the lime trees, past the restaurants, where still a few tables stood outside, in the crisp autumn air. The leaves being late that year, sometimes a solitary one
blown from the dry twig where it lingered, would flutter with lingering exquisite grace to his feet, reminding him, so that he seemed to smell the resinous sharp scent of poplars. He dreamed that one morning they would bring a telegram to his bedside, summoning him home, because his wife had been taken ill suddenly in the night. He would take the steamer. He would drive through the foggy London streets, and when he got to his house, he would find the blinds drawn down. On the morning of December the 2nd, they brought a telegram to his bedside, summoning him home. His wife had been taken ill suddenly in the night. It has not occurred to Belford that there would have to be an inquest. It all passed off, however, extremely well. The deceased lady had been a sufferer from a painful complaint affecting the kidneys, and had been accustomed to take each night a tablet containing 10 grains of veronal to allay pain and induce sleep. A second medical man agreed that veronal was a powerful hypnotic, and usually harmless in the pharmacopoeial dose. Dr. Lovett affirmed that he had repeatedly warned Mrs. Belford against taking more than the prescribed dose, particularly as the disease from which she suffered made her particularly susceptible to veronal poisoning. As a matter of fact, the ordinary minimum fatal dose of the drug was 50 grains, so that if the patient had accidentally taken 2 tablets instead of 1, the consequences should not have been serious. He had, however, out of precaution, made it clear to her that the single tablet was not on any account to be exceeded within the 24 hours, and she appeared perfectly to understand this. The bottle was produced. The maid, Maggie Brown, recollected that this had been brought home by Mr. Belford on the morning of October the 25th. It was then intact, with its mouth sealed over with wax, just as it came from the chemist. She had seen the original wrapper with the chemist's label lying on the bedside table. Mrs. Belford had not begun to take the tablets till 2 days later, having still 2 tablets left from the former supply. A representative of a firm of chemists in the city identified the bottle and the label. He remembered selling it to Mr. Belford in person on October the 25th. The mouth of the bottle had been stoppered with wax, as it had come from the wholesalers. The bottle contained 50 tablets, each containing 10 grains of veronal. The analyst gave evidence. He had examined the body of the deceased and found that she had died from taking an overdose of veronal. From the amount of the drug found in the viscera, he concluded that she had taken at least 100 grains, or about twice the minimum fatal dose. He had also analyzed the tablets remaining in the bottle, and had found them to contain each exactly 10 grains of veronal. There were 5 tablets left in the bottle. If Mrs. Belford had started taking the tablets on October the 28th, and had taken 1 each night regularly, there should have been 15 remaining. If Mrs. Belford had taken 10 tablets instead of 1 on the night of December the 1st, that would account for the amount of veronal estimated to have been present in the body. The coroner said that this appeared to be a very clear case. Deceased, who seemed to be in her usual health on December the 1st, had been found dead on the morning of December 2nd of acute veronal poisoning. From the circumstance that there were 10 tablets fewer in the bottle than there ought to have been, there seemed to be no room for doubt that the unfortunate lady, failing to obtain her accustomed relief from pain and sleeplessness, had unhappily taken an overdose, the effects of which had been intensified by the kidney complaint from which she suffered. No blame could attach to Dr. Lovett, who, unable to wean his patient from the drug that gave her so much relief, had frequently warned her against its misuse. There was no evidence whatever that Mrs. Belford had at any time had any intention of doing herself an injury. On the day before her death, she had spoken cheerfully about the return of her husband from Germany. Mr. Belford, with whom they must all feel the deepest sympathy, had testified to the uniformly harmonious relations between himself and his wife, and there was no evidence that the deceased had any domestic or financial trouble playing upon her mind. The jury brought in a verdict of death by misadventure. On December the 18th, Mr. Belford, having adjusted matters satisfactorily with all his creditors, came down to breakfast with a good appetite. Beside his plate lay a typewritten envelope. He opened it and saw, with a curious pang of apprehension, the printed heading: Smith and Smith. Removals. There was no address. Dear Sir, with reference to your esteemed order of the 25th of October for a removal from your private address, we trust that this commission has been carried out to your satisfaction. We beg to acknowledge your obliging favour of £500, and return herewith the order of removal which you are good enough to hand to us, assuring you of our best attention at all times. Faithfully yours, Smith and Smith. He turned curiously to the enclosure. It bore his signature, but he had no recollection of having seen it before. It ran, I, Adrian Belford of— here followed his address— hereby confess that I murdered my wife, Catherine Elizabeth Belford, in the following manner. Knowing that she was in the habit of taking each night a tablet containing 10 grams of veronal, a compound of diethyl barbituric acid, I opened a bottle of these tablets and removed 10 of them, substituting a single tablet containing 10 grains of a new barbituric acid compound, which, giving a similar chemical reaction to veronal, is 10 times more powerful in hypnotic effect. The result of this would be that on taking this tablet, as she was in due course bound to do, my wife would consume a dose of 10 grains of the new compound equal to 100 grains of the ordinary tablets, or twice the minimum fatal dose. The fatal tablet was prepared for me, in anticipation of these events, by the Gesellschaft Schmidt of Berlin during my visit to Germany last May, of course in ignorance of the purpose for which it was required. My reason for committing this crime was that I had misappropriated certain trust moneys belonging to the Ingleborough estate, and desired to replace them from the estate to which I was entitled under my late wife's will. I make this confession, being troubled in my conscience. Adrian Belford, the 17th of December, 1930. With shaking hands, Belford thrust letter and enclosure into the fire. Dorothy L. Sayers. Dorothy L. Sayers, 1893 to 1957, needs little introduction. Though she wrote comparatively few novels and short stories, they form an impressively consistent and enjoyable body of work, second only perhaps to that by Agatha Christie. Without Sayers, Sherlockian scholarship would not be the flourishing pseudo-academic field it is today. And the Detection Club, founded by her contemporary, Anthony Berkeley, would have languished as nothing more than a dining society for crime writers, without the many collaborative books and radio serials that Sayers initiated as one of the club's most active members, and as its president. Without Sayers' reviews and penetrating insights into the art and artifice of the detective story, the genre would surely not have developed internationally as a field of academic study. And without the Protean aristocrat Lord Peter Wimsey, there would almost certainly be no Campion, no Dalgleish, and no Linley, to name but a few of the detectives whose character and approach bear some mark of Sayers' sleuth. Sayers also wrote widely in many genres, and for some of her admirers, her crime stories and her studies of the genre are merely a distraction from even greater achievements, her analyses of Christian doctrine and her translations of Dante. For the majority, however, the reverse is certainly true. There is the Wimsey canon, 21 short stories and 11 novels,
several of which were memorably televised, first with Ian Carmichael, Lord Peter Wimsey, 1972 to 1975, and subsequently with Edward Petherbridge, a Dorothy L. Sayers mystery, 1987. There are also the delightful stories of Montague Egg, a travelling wine salesman, and various non-series stories, the foremost being the extraordinary Blood Sacrifice. As with the best of her contemporaries, Sayers draws on tropes of the genre, the impossible crime, the invisible weapon, and so on, to create puzzles that remain as entertainingly baffling today as when they were first published, in some cases nearly a century ago. And as with Charles Dickens, her work is peppered with memorable characters, not the least of whom is the detective novelist Harriet Vane, in many ways a self-portrait of Sayers. Smith and Smith Removals 1, The House of the Poplars, by Dorothy L. Sayers, is a previously unpublished manuscript held by the Marion E. Wade Center, Wheaton College, Illinois, USA, which has the largest and most comprehensive collection of published and unpublished resources by and about Sayers worldwide. The original manuscript is 28 handwritten pages with revisions by Sayers. The Wade Center manuscript number is DLS/MS-187. It was the first of two stories written by Sayers in the 1920s featuring the removals firm of Smith and Smith. The other, The Leopard Lady, was collected in the Teeth of the Evidence, 1939, and filmed with Boris Karloff for the American television series Lights Out in 1950.